Welcome to the Good Business Dufferin podcast, hosted by the Dufferin Board of Trade through our social enterprise, the Dufferin Biz Hub. Our podcast is based on our belief that small businesses have the power to drive positive change in our community. Our conversations with local experts will help your business thrive, and our talks with community leaders will inspire you to make a difference in Dufferin County. Whether you're looking to grow your business, strengthen our community, or hopefully both, we've got you covered. Hello and welcome back. I'm Diana Morris, Executive Director of the Dufferin Board of Trade and the Dufferin Biz Hub. Today we're joined by Sonia McDonald, a certified child and youth counselor with extensive experience in the mental health field. Sonia is a passionate advocate for mental health awareness, suicide intervention, and creative, inclusive spaces. In this episode, Sonia will share the importance of mental health and well-being in the workplace, sharing actionable steps to create supportive work environments and improved employee well-being. A special thank you to our sponsor, Avertex Utility Solutions. Let's dive into this important conversation. So, Sonia, can you tell us why mental health is essential for employers to address in the workplace?
Well, I think it boils down to being as simple sometimes as mental health is as important as physical health. And so when people are feeling mentally well, we know that organizations and businesses are going to do well. We want people to come to work and be happy and be comfortable and feel safe. And so I think that's why it's so important to start those conversations at work.
Thank you. What are some common signs that an employer should look for that their employees might be struggling or not doing well?
Well, I think there's a combination of things. I think when it comes to an individual, sometimes we could be seeing things like absenteeism, starting to see people's moods change, definitely seeing a change in their level of work, the type of work maybe that they're doing. But then the other piece of that is, you might start to see groups of people who work with you who maybe are frustrated or angry, or lots of back and forth talking about how things should be, or talking about how they think the organization should run, that types of. Sometimes that's a really good indicator to an employer that maybe the culture of their company could be struggling with some mental health concerns.
So what role does that workplace culture play in mental health?
Well, I think it's really similar to kids. We send kids to school. They are in school 6-8 hours a day. We're at work 6 or 8 hours a day, a lot of us. And so, think about that theory of having, work family. We spend as much time with our coworkers as we do with our families. So I think that it's really important to recognize that work isn't just work. Work is should be a comfortable culture to be in all the time. And I think that's why it feels to us in the mental health world that work is the perfect place to start for people.
How do employers start having these conversations about mental health?
Well, I think working really hard to make sure that everybody is comfortable having those conversations. I think the best place to start for any company, whether it's a large organization or a small one, is education. We need to know what we're looking for. We need to know what are some of the things that are happening in an organization. Starting a conversation with someone out of the blue about their mental health might not feel comfortable for someone. It might not feel safe. And so I think we do it incrementally, systemically, but there's lots of little things that we can do in an organization or in a business to try and create that culture. And it's actually, a lot of those things are not as costly as we think. A lot of times they're not really big things. People just want to feel heard and they just want to feel safe.
So how do you start those conversations then if, it is awkward, but if you see someone needs to chat or you feel that, there's something and you hear rumors or something in the workplace isn't the way it should be? How do you, as an employer, how do you start that conversation?
I would check in with them.
Yeah.
Hey, how's it going? I've noticed the best way to really approach a conversation with someone is to point out what you've noticed, so that they're feeling seen, so they're feeling heard, and really just check in with them to say, and allowing the space for someone to sit and talk about how they're feeling. You may not get all of the details, but it might give the employer a little bit of a sense of what might be happening with this person. And then before going into the conversation, maybe also knowing what are some things you could offer this person? What are some things that might be helpful that is within your control as an employer?
Interesting. So I know for our chamber members, they many of them have the chamber's plan insurance benefits. So you can have access to a counselor with that or employee assistance. What are other things that an employer could or should be able to offer their employees for mental health issues?
I think if someone is struggling, I think one of the best things any organization can do or an employer can do is have all of local crisis resources, crisis lines, those kinds of things. I think everyone should have them. They should also be posted. I mean, I think that, creating an environment where it's okay to talk about mental health and reducing the stigma, we do that by education. I think that's part of it. The other part of it is really working at little strategies that can help employees feel like it's okay to be struggling some days and it's okay to need the time to work through some of that stuff, because maybe working through that stuff at work isn't the best place to do that. And so just supporting someone and checking in with them and not maybe handing them a card to say, here, call EAP. Maybe it's more of a conversation around what might be happening. Have you ever looked at this? Here's what the EAP in our organization looks like,
Yeah, those are really great steps. So you're saying basically, even if we had it posted, just sort of normalizing the fact that here's the numbers to call for support kind of thing, have them posted. And we do in Dufferin County have local support lines, or do you go to provincial support lines?
Yeah. So anytime that I'm working with anybody or talking with anybody, even employers, I always offer local, provincial, and national. So sometimes people don't feel comfortable seeking mental health help in their own community, which I get. I completely understand. Yeah. But then there are also provincial ones. There's online. Everybody is different. And so some people need a very different approach. Some people can really function well online and can have a really good relationship with someone. And some people can't do that. And some people like the self-guided approach, which can be really helpful. So through apps and websites and those types of things. So there's lots of variety of ways to get help.
Great. That's great to know that as employers too, we can help share a variety of opportunities. Yeah. So we will post phone numbers and links to different sites at the end of this the end of this podcast, just so everyone has them available. When employers are trying to make employees feel safe and make it clear that they're a safe space, that they're a safe environment, is there anything specific that an employer could do to help show that?
I think one of the best things that employers can do is talk with their employees about what might be helpful to them and what makes them safe. I think everyone, no matter what, just wants to be heard and wants to be a part of the process. And I think if we include employees in the process of creating a safe, comfortable environment, I think that's the first step. And there's all these little things that we can do that don't require big gestures. When I think about things like providing water at work or coffee. So this is a really good example. I just did a training, a Healthy Minds training recently. And one of the examples that came out was, well, we don't just have a pot of coffee. All organizations generally have coffee for their staff, but they create different types of coffee with the syrups and the nice coffees and different types of coffee. It seems like something elaborate, but it's really not. And the cost is really not a lot different. And it's those little things. And I had a lady in the training say to me, the best thing my employer ever did was buy me almond milk. And I thought, okay. But she just said, no one, I always have to bring it with me. I always have to, do those things. And I have to think about my own diet and my own needs. But one day, my employer just said, you never have to worry about that again. I'll buy it for you.
That's fantastic.
And you're talking $3 a week. It's not a huge expense, right?
So it's those small things. And we do that. Coffee is a big part of the culture here at the
Absolutely.
We have all the flavor shots and we have almond milk. We also have iced coffee because especially our summer students, they lived on iced coffee all summer. So those little things that have, as you say, hardly any cost, but just help elevate the experience and help everybody feel good. Those are great tips.
Food is great.
Yeah.
So food is really great. I always say that comfort facilitates comfort. So when we have food or we have the things that make us comfortable, then those are the things that will make people happy. Small little things like that will make people very, very happy.
And I loved your thought about the almond milk if someone needs it. So
It's
not
so
only
good.
providing food, but being knowing who you have in the room and
Yeah.
what they can and can't have and what they like, right? That's
Absolutely.
really important for making everyone feel like they're part of it.
Yeah. And when you think about it from an investment, like a return on investment, when you think about a company that, say, does pizza party for their staff once a month or once every 3 months, and we're going to bring food because everybody did a great job, that's wonderful. But what creates this comfortable, welcoming environment is things like granola bars every day or little tiny things that cost the same amount as, say, a pizza party at a workplace. And I think those are the things that people really appreciate. Having open door policies is really, really important for people too, knowing that they can have that conversation and not feel like it's a problem to have that conversation is also something very small, no cost. It can be helpful.
Yeah. So there's lots of little small ways that we can make things better, but obviously there's bigger ways too. So you mentioned already about training. So what does training look like for managers and employers in the community?
So I always think that we need to be looking at a systemic approach to training and education. So in order for us to learn to have good, healthy conversations around mental health, I think that people need to be educated. Not everyone needs to be an expert. Not everyone needs to know about every single type of mental health concern. What we need to be aware of is that we all have mental health and, some of us struggle with it and some of us don't every day. And so looking at training options around learning about mental health. The other piece is I always tell organizations and employers that, you need to be taking a little bit of a temperature check. Take a temperature check of your organization. Whether you need help doing that, bring in someone who can help you do that. And it's not always just with managers, supervisors, right? We need to be including staff members. People want to be heard. They want to have their say and they will know what works the best. It's like trying to create really good quality programming for young people, but don't ask young people what they're into or interested in. So I think it's the same concept. So taking a climate of the organization, finding out where the gaps are. There's sometimes gaps and it's okay to have those gaps. And it's how do we fill them and how do we address them? Creating really good policies and procedures around mental wellness, which not a lot of organizations have. There's some really good tools out there, some good training out there to do that. And then really just regrouping and refocusing and constantly reviewing those pieces and seeing what's helpful for people, what works, what doesn't. And then for people who work in really high stress jobs, I think it's important to also look at, once you have a sense of what people might be struggling with in your industry, looking at industry specific. So I specialize in suicide intervention, and I think everyone needs to have suicide intervention training. But then there's also, some job roles are very high demand caregiving roles. And we also do a training called empathic strain. And we need to look at what's our cost of caring. What is that? What does that cost to us? What are some of the things that we need to look at for our own well-being, our own self-care, those types. There's lots of really great trainings out there.
That's good. That's good to know. You said something, we all have mental health. And I've heard you say that before. And I know a lot of people, we think of mental health as only being the negative, the mental health concerns or issues. But can you elaborate a bit more on what you mean by we all have mental health?
So I think sometimes people generally think that mental health is a bad thing, right? And if you have mental health, then you have a problem with your mental health. But if you think about mental health like it's a continuum, and we all have it, similarly to we all have physical health, some days we struggle and some days we maybe can't get out of bed and some days we really are not functioning at the level we normally would. And then other days we could be at the other end of the spectrum where we are on our game and doing the best possible work and feeling the best. But what we know is that's either side of that spectrum. Most of us slide around day to day. It's different for everyone every day. But if we start thinking about mental health the same way we look at physical health, I think that we would be in a much better place around stigma. And hopefully people will maybe no longer think that if we talk about mental health, that it's a negative or a problem.
And stigma obviously is still a problem, unfortunately. We do hear that. We have some stats in our training that we do for the Level Up Dufferin program that say a huge percentage of people are treated differently when they diagnose or when they disclose their diagnosis. What can employers do to help prevent that stigma and any negative feelings towards employees?
I think the biggest challenge, that's one of the biggest challenges for employers, is to try and make a comfortable and calm environment for people to be able to be open about their mental health concerns. So if someone has had a recent diagnosis and they're wanting to share that with their employer, sometimes that's a really difficult thing. So I think the best possible thing we can do is for employers and HR departments and supervisors to be educated around mental health. And honestly, the best piece of advice I can give anyone is just be a good listener. Don't try to fix it. Don't try to help people understand. Ask questions if you need to, but just listen, because usually that's all people really, really want.
And when you're listening, if there's ways to come up with accommodations, like are you aware of specific things that businesses can do to accommodate someone with some mental health challenges?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to accommodate in an organization. And it's always a bit of a tough conversation because from an employer perspective, we need productivity. We need to make money, right? This is the goal. But we also need to recognize that people sometimes need the time and space. So whether that is little accommodations around having a little bit of extra time, I don't know, at lunchtime, or maybe hybrid work. Maybe they need to be at home some days, they need to be at work some days. And not maybe lessening someone's workload, but maybe changing the way our understanding or our expectations are as employers. I think that can be helpful as an accommodation for people.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Things like maybe flex time, like different start or end times kind of thing. Yeah, I see those things being really beneficial.
Right. And I see, sometimes we look at organizations and employers will say things like, well, I only want to give accommodations when I absolutely have to. So when we think about people's various faiths, for example, sometimes people need a specific time during the day to be able to take a moment for themselves and practice their faith. Why are we not doing that for someone who's struggling with anxiety and has just gotten off the phone and has had a really difficult conversation and they're struggling? It's okay for them to take that extra 4 or 5 minutes to just take a moment, have a coffee, do what they need to do to regroup.
That's great advice. And you're saying employers only want to do that when they have to, but employees don't have to disclose that they have mental health, right? So is there anything we should be doing, just blanket across the organization to make sure that people aren't feeling obligated to let us know?
Yeah, I think the open and direct conversations are what is the most important thing. And so it takes time. It takes time to create that environment. I know people are good in general, right? We're good human beings. We want the best for our employees. We want the best for anyone in our lives, but just learning to listen, learning to be a little more accepting than we are, and recognizing that if someone's angry or someone is maybe has lower productivity than they normally do, recognizing that as a sign that maybe there's something happening for them, giving them a moment of pause, giving them a moment before we jump on them to say, you only made 4 of these things instead of 8 of these things, or you only accomplished this instead of that. Just trying to be a little more understanding of people, because people right now really are struggling with their mental health across the board.
And we're mainly talking about mental health in the workplace between coworkers and management. But what about people who deal with the public, who have to deal with people coming in, customers who may, you mentioned, people being angry? Like, do you have any tips for people who have to deal with the general public?
Yeah, I would say, again, it's about that understanding and that patience. And, we all know that theory. If anybody's ever worked in retail, the customer's always right. And you just smile and nod. And sometimes that becomes very difficult. And what I always, when someone is struggling, if someone's being mean to me or someone is frustrated, I often think to myself, oh, what's happening for that person right now? And I always give them a moment. It doesn't mean that we need to tolerate being mistreated. We don't, we shouldn't tolerate people's anger. But in that moment, just having one moment to train our brains to think what could be happening for this person and what's within my control that I can help them with.
And that's so true, because our control is very limited. We don't have control of what other people think or do. Right. So it's how we react to that is so important. So we've talked a lot about what employers can and should do. Can you share anything that you've heard of employers doing that they really should not be doing? Any mistakes employers have made?
Oh, that's a hard one. If you ask, it depends on who you ask, right? If you ask employees, there's a lot of mistakes that employers make. I think things around policies, around breaks, around work hours, those types of things. I think often we think that we need to create the highest productivity, but what we know is the more stressed out employees are, the higher the absentee rate. And we know that in Canada, I think it's $6.3 billion lost in 2022 in absenteeism. So when you think about what can be helpful for people, I think we need to look at that. Some of the things employers shouldn't be doing is, taking that really frustrated approach with you only get 15 minutes. So yes, we don't want people to take advantage, but we also want to try and balance that a little bit. The other thing is allowing people the time and space and creating those policies, because some of our policies do not lend themselves well. I think it's time for all of us to review our policies and as employers, because they don't always fit with people's mental health. And we're not really just talking about mental health, right? So when we talk about people who are needing extra tolerance in their community or understanding, I think it's really important for us to look at it from all perspectives. And I think it's time for us to look at some of those policies, because they're pretty often antiquated, right?
Yeah, that's really great. We really, do recommend that businesses look at their policies annual or semi-annual, just because things change, especially in the sphere of mental health, but in all things accessibility, things change really quickly. So it is important to make sure that your policies don't just live on a shelf, that you are living and breathing and adhering to what you say you're going to do. That's
small things like person-centered language is so important when we're creating policies, but I'm sure most organizations, who has the time to sit and do that? But I think that's one of the mistakes we make, is we don't make the time to do that, and we don't consult our employees. I think that's their other biggest.
Yeah, make sure it's bottom up, not a top down approach. Yeah, that's great advice. When we talk about mental health issues in the workplace, how does an employer balance privacy of their employee with giving them the resources they need?
I think that's a very difficult and very individualized thing. I think having the conversation with someone who's requiring a level of privacy, I think everyone is entitled to privacy, but I think having that conversation, what are some things that you're okay with me sharing? One of the best policies out there around confidentiality is called the Up Not Out policy. It was created by York University in the residences a long time ago. And the concept is, we talk about it in suicide intervention training, is I can promise you discretion, but I can't promise you secrecy. So if there is something that I need to share, I can promise you that I'm only going to share it with someone above me and not everyone around me. Right. And then if it needs to go up another level, they promise to only share and not with everyone around them. And I think that makes people feel safe.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't heard of that.
It's a good policy, yeah.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Is there anything else that we should share with small businesses that they should know about mental health in the workplace?
I'm not sure. I think recognizing that, we have very specific mental health days. We, just like everything else, right? We have days that we mark and we do a really good job. I think the biggest thing that any employer can take away is that this is an everyday struggle for some people, but this is also an everyday walk. We need to be walking that talk and doing the things that we said we were going to do, and starting with taking that temperature check, to do that climate check around your organization to see where people are feeling. Sometimes employees work pretty hard to hide things from their employer because they don't want to lose their employment. But at the end of the day, there's some really easy things we can be doing that can be helpful. Yeah.
That's great. What a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Good Business Dufferin podcast. Big thank you again, Sonia, for sharing your insights and expertise. We'd like to also extend our gratitude to this episode's sponsor, Avertex Utility Solutions, for supporting this important conversation and helping us bring valuable content to our community. Creating supportive environments and fostering open conversations about mental health can make a world of difference for employees, for teams, and the success of your business. Whether it's starting small by raising awareness or implementing impactful initiatives, every step matters in building a healthier, more inclusive workplace. Stay connected with the Dufferin Board of Trade for more resources, events, and future podcast episodes. Until next time, keep driving positive change because good business is good for everyone. Founded in 2003, Avertex Utility Solutions provides a wide range of utility installation services. We have the manpower and the equipment to construct it, rehabilitate it, rebuild it, or install it.